Nadine was there, some of you may or may not know. But we'll start with this picture as far as what you know. And that's Neil D. Snyder there. And I think there's a label at the bottom of the picture. And next to him is a lady that he called Aunt Bessie. And to explain a little bit about the background of our history is, if you go back 3 generations, you'll find our name isn't really Snyder. I don't know if it comes as a shock to anybody here, but my great-grandfather, who is the father of my grandfather, and he is also the father of, no, he's not there. I get my generations mixed up now. His name was Eli Madlin, and so my grandfather, whose name was Bert Snyder,
doesn't have his hearing aids.
was originally Bert Madlin, but his biological father left the family. We don't know how, either by death or by the call of the West. We don't know. And so my grandfather, Bert Snyder, took the name of Charles Snyder, who came along and married my great-grandmother. Her name was Letitia Doan Snyder. Doan, the other one. So that's how we got to be Snyders. My father was, and my grandfather was born in 1874. He died in 1970.
He's on his third base.
My father was born, of course, in 1907, and he died in 1996. The funeral was here, so many of you may remember him if you're not a millennial. I have some letters that were passed along to me. Did you give anything? Maybe Lindsay did. Lindsay. Yeah, but anyway, I had never seen them before, and myself, and they're handwritten letters by my father in 1928, when he was 19 years old. Another background here to this has to be that in 1990, all these people are from Nebraska. All the ancestors are from Nebraska, both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side. They're originally from Illinois. They migrated to Nebraska. Not an unusual thing to happen in those days. This is after the Civil War. And I was explaining Aunt Bessie. And Aunt Bessie is my grandfather's sister. Half sister and so forth. So, they migrated from Nebraska, the whole, then they were called Snyders, Snyder family, to Virginia in 1919. Now, when I say they all migrated, we're talking about, at that time, 6 sons and 2 daughters. Three?
Oh, no, that's right.
Yeah, they came from Nebraska here. 2 last daughters were born in Virginia in 1920. The last of whom passed away just last year. Aunt Sissy, we all called her, of course. And she was, what, 90? Something. 96.
No, that wouldn't be right.
Well, 1920 to, you figured it out, okay. So that's what brought them there. Now, why am I saying this now? The reason I'm saying this now is our father, that's the father of Christy and myself, and this group here, was 12 years old when they migrated from Nebraska to Virginia. And he had 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers. So he's kind of the middle child, kind of like I am, middle child. And the phenomenal thing is, the remarkable thing is that 6 years later, when he's 19 years old, he takes it upon himself to hitchhike to Nebraska because he hears his mother and father and older brothers talking about life in Nebraska and what it was like then. Of course, he was raised there up to age 12. So he hitchhikes to Nebraska. And he left on April 12th, 1927, excuse me. And he would have been 17 years old. Of course, I should have said this at the beginning. Today commemorates his birthday. He was born July 22nd, 1907. So at this time, he would have been 19. He wouldn't be 20 until July. And I don't know if this is like a teenage bucket list or go and do this before you turn 20. So this is what he did. And I'm going to read some of these letters. I pondered, what should I do? I should type this up. It was hard enough for me to read it. It's not because he's a bad writer. He's better than I do. You can't hardly read my writing unless you slow me way down. But he always wrote good handwriting, is what I'm talking about. So, and we learn from the letter that he's kind of like Jacob in the Bible. And he gravitated to his mother. You agree with that, brother?
You mean about Jacob or Granddaddy?
Yeah. Both of them. Both of them, that's what I'm trying to point out. So you have that situation. When we went to see grandmother and grandfather, we were always supposed to say, we're going to Mama's house. And my father always called it Mama's house. And he said, Papa, who we called our grandfather, always said to the children, you must call this Mama's house. Because I want the whole family to know this is Mama's house. I don't know if he's trying to push off responsibility or what, but anyway. Okay. So he starts out April 12th, and I'm going to read you some of what he wrote at that time. April 27, 1928. My dear mother. Oh, it's 1927. Well, how is this for fast walking? I bet you didn't know your son could walk so fast. I started Friday morning at 12th and Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., walked about 10 blocks, caught a ride in a Chevrolet halfway across the city. I rode in a Dodge sedan in Maryland to the Maryland line. Here I caught a Corby bread truck driver, driven by the name of a man named Mr. Sheehy, who is the man I used to rent a room from in Washington. Okay, what's being disclosed here? He's 19 years old and he's renting a room in Washington, D.C. So, I guess he didn't want to be a, what do they call him, a couch coaster? Or what? Come back to his parents. He wanted to leave. He wasn't the prodigal one. Wasn't the prodigal. We'll see this later. A man I used to rent from, he took me about 5 miles, and it started to rain when he let me out. I got in a Pontiac sedan and rode about 10 miles to Gaithersburg, Maryland. I walked about a mile in the rain, but didn't get wet. Remember, he's writing to his mother, who's very protective of her son. Didn't get wet, Mom. A Cadillac sedan came along with 2 ladies and 2 little boys. And I asked them for a ride, but they went by me without even slowing up. One of the women looked back, and I tipped my hat and made one of my best bows. You know what I mean. At that, she stopped and waited for me. She said she was afraid to stop for most fellows because there are so many bold eyes on the road nowadays. But seeing I belonged to the Boy Scouts, she took me in. She still thinks I'm a Boy Scout. He wrote that. Next sentence. Is that 2? So I should add 3. Yeah, okay. He turned his paper vertically over. I rode in the Cadillac to Frederick, Maryland. Went through there at 8 o'clock. The women went north there, so I had to get out in the rain again. This time I walked about 2 miles, was getting quite wet when a traveling salesman came along in a Chevrolet coupe, and I rode with him about 15 miles. We saw an overland coupe from Ohio right behind us, so we stopped him and I got in with him. He was going to Marion, Ohio, and said he would be glad to have company, as he would be driving all night. He said he had just been down on Eastern Shore, Maryland, to his sister's funeral. Maybe you read of her death in the paper. Their bow and their car run over a bank, killing them both. He went down to the funeral and had to get back to his home, for his wife was very sick. We crossed some very beautiful country. I sent you a card in Cumberland with a view on it. I'm going to skip the rest of that. I'm going to skip to page 5. I'm going to skip 5. I'm going to skip. Okay. All right, this is later on. A lot of descriptive stuff and so forth. We arrived in Marion, that's Marion, Ohio, about 4 o'clock, and I slept in the depot till 6:30. So, driving all night, 4 o'clock to 6:30. After mailing you a card, I started on about a half mile from town. Some young colored fellows in an Essex sedan stopped and asked if they were on their right road to some little town. I told them yes. And I,
Sedan was that? Like he would know.
Essex.
Essex, okay.
I told them yes, and I would ride with them so they wouldn't get off the road.
Like he knew
Off the right road. They were headed for Gary, Indiana. So I said I would help them find the way. We crossed into Indiana about 11 o'clock. Everything's okay. And not long after, it started snowing. It snowed quite hard for about half an hour. Then the sun came out, but it was still cold again. I was glad to have a sedan to ride in. We arrived in Gary about 5 o'clock. Gary is only 5 miles from Chicago. I took a bus into Chicago so as not to get lost too bad then. Tried to find my way across the rest of the city on the elevated streetcars. First I made this, remember this, 1927. First I made a wrong transfer, got farther away instead of closer to the west side of town. Finally I found a map of the city. Then some fellows helped me find the right cars to get on, and I got clear out of town on the west side, at the end of the car line. I found some empty cars, and the watchman turned on the heat, so I would have a warm place to sleep. I got to sleep about 11:30 and had a very good night's rest. Well, I'm only halfway here, and I'm tired of writing, and you'll be tired of reading. So we'll finish the trip in the next letter to be continued. And we're going to drop off that one there. Oh, his closing at the end of the letter says, "Your fast walking son, Neil."
So that was all
So he
one
takes
letter.
the rest of the trip. Now, let me fill in. The letter is dated, what, April 27th. He left on April 12th. Well, he wrote the letters after he got there, because I was thinking to myself, how's this guy hitchhiking? He sits down and writes this good penmanship and so forth. So he wrote the letters after he got there. All right, the second letter. My dear mother, April 28th. I will start at Chicago, where I stopped in the other letter, and finish the trip. I suppose you didn't like my way of doing it, I mean the letters. But you see, it was bedtime, and I didn't want to keep the folks here up. Drop that one off there. Okay, and we're going to continue in that letter here. So he hitchhikes on from Chicago to Clinton, Iowa. Now, I'd like a geographical note here. He's following Highway 30. And Highway 30, besides the national road, which is from Baltimore to Ohio. Highway 30 was the main thoroughfare, and by 1927 it was paved. Now that was unusual then. So he's, for obvious reasons, he's sticking to the paved road. So that's why he goes up through Frederick and Hagerstown and Cumberland and up into Washington, Pennsylvania, and he talks about Washington and Wheeling and so forth and so on. So, we take Pickettstown. I've been there, been through there, traveled Highway 30 myself, not by thumb. Clinton, Iowa. As I walked through here and across the bridge, that would be the bridge across the Mississippi River, through Clinton, which was about 5 miles, the farthest I walked at one time on the whole trip. On the whole trip from there, I rode in a Ford coupe about 5 miles, then hailed a young couple in a Chevrolet sedan. They said they were just out for a ride, going somewhere, nowhere in particular. So I suggested that they take me to Omaha. And that's clear across the state of Iowa. That's at least 300 miles from where it was. So, but I'm going to skip all that small talk. I'm going to go over here. There's not much, he's in Iowa now, right? There's not much to say about this country along here, for it is all the same. Just flat land with fences, houses, barns, cows, horses, pigs, sheep, and etc. The next ride I got was with a farmer and a Studebaker. We went through the Indian reservation, and that's there in southwestern Iowa, where we camped that time. He took me about 22 miles to a town called Marshalltown. Well, this stuff gets tiresome, I know, so we'll cut it short. For the rest of the day, I just got short rides in a Ford Roadster, a Ford touring car, a Nash, a Ford truck, a 1914 Buick, a 1913 Ford truck, a Ford sedan, and finally arrived in Jefferson, Iowa in a Ford coupe at 9 o'clock in the evening. By the way, I drive a Ford. I got a room here too because I was awful tired. At Marshalltown, Iowa, I've been there, been through there. I guess I should say, for those of you who don't know, I lived for 17 years in Iowa. That's where the mother of my children and I were married, and I taught school there and so forth and so on. What was that? That was 8?
Adam and I got together.
Okay. Made 108 miles in 3 hours and 15 minutes, which is very good for a Pontiac. That's from Marshalltown to Omaha. We were 10 minutes behind the train. The guy I got in with told him, he said, sure, you can ride with me, but I'm trying to catch that train. I want to go past the train. So they're racing, of course, the train track parallels Highway 30 also, and they try to pass him, but they didn't get past him. So that's what he's talking about. From here, I rode into Omaha with a farmer in a whippet.
A whippet? That's a
whippet.
dog.
There was some kind of car. Everybody was making cars. There was an Alice Chalmers car at one time, right?
Eric, did you hear that?
I'm reading this part for your appreciation and for your...
All the cars
your
are here.
brother. Oh, here's a brother over here. But the Alice Chalmers.
Eric's the one that,
He's
yeah, he's
I'm
not
getting
here,
it.
yeah.
Pam and Shelley.
getting it.
All right. I'm sorry.
No,
When in the
he's
whippet, we got to Omaha at 10 after 12,
every
making
2
just
minutes, so
102 hours and 40 minutes. This is his total trip now. 102 hours, 40 minutes. I didn't count seconds, he puts in parentheses.
He's making that up.
Your father. And $7.40 spent on the trip. Not so bad, was it?
Wow.
The end. But then he goes on, it's like a P.S. Well, Aunt Bessie or Grandma, neither one knew me when I walked in here. They both look about the same to me. Only Grandma is thinner and Aunt Bessie fatter. Aunt Bessie is the person in the
Did
picture.
Nick write that?
Tell them who Grandma is.
Did Nick write that?
I'm pretty sure this is Grandma Cantrell. It could
And
be
what was her name? Callisto.
Callista Neal Cantrell.
Huh, Neil, that's where his name should be.
This is Aunt Bessie.
That's Aunt
That's
Bessie.
Aunt Bessie.
That's fat Aunt Bessie.
He did.
Fatter than she used
Yeah,
to be.
Bessie, you got fatter.
He
Vicky,
outgrew
you
those
sure he
kinds
didn't
of
write that?
observations.
Yeah. He was around Granddaddy a lot.
Okay, I start on tomorrow morning to see Arna and Amos. Now, Arna's another aunt, but she is a daughter of Charles Snyder. So remember, these are
Another
adopted.
half.
She's not adopted. No, she's, yeah, but they're half
So
anyway.
you're from West Virginia?
Amos, and Amos first at Cozad, then I find Grandma Cantrell and Aunt Orphy. We had very nice weather here since I got here, but it is raining a little tonight. We'll have to finish this with a pencil where I ran out of ink. And I'm upstairs and everyone else is in bed. I started to say, isn't the flood down south terrible? This is a comment on the current news. So we get reports over the radio every few minutes of the day. There are a lot of money being sent from here for relief work and so forth. So that's the end of that one. And then to read the next letter, he gets a job with his uncle Amos, who is the husband of Aunt Arna. Arna and Amos. There's an old radio show. Well, they're pretty close. So they go out west. They go out to a place called Bignell, and that's in western Nebraska, and it's like northwest of North Platte. And in Bignell, the adopted father, Charles Snyder, the stepfather, set up a general store. And there is a picture somewhere in the archives of him in that general store. By the way, I have over 1,000 pictures on a thumb drive. And one of my grandsons made it for me because I don't know anything about that stuff. And I bought him 6 other thumb drives. One was for the BCU. And asked him to copy them. I never heard from him since.
Oh.
Next time I
He'll
saw
get back
him,
to us.
I brought it up. And you didn't know. So, this young man's 30 years old. So,
Where did you get those pictures?
This could have
that's
Oh,
been
another
60s.
story.
Were they at Sissy's?
It's a
And she
person,
wouldn't let
it's
us
a
have
person
some?
of a descendant of Aunt Bessie, another side of the family.
You're talking about, what's her name?
Yes.
Wisconsin. And we
So,
met her.
don't get me off here. The rest of us are gonna leave,
Yeah, the in-laws aren't exactly.
Oh, what I was going to say is this. So he went west, and he got a job, apparently on a cattle ranch, and he went out with his uncle, and they were rounding up. He said he went on a roundup. Got over 200 cattle and calves, and they were inoculating them. I thought I was going to say branding them, but he never said that. They were inoculating them. So we're getting modern here, yeah, past the range age and so forth. He said, but I didn't like the horse I was on, telling his mother. And then they went again. He says, so we went on a second roundup, and it was better than the first one. He said, I got a cow horse. And then in parentheses, he says to his mother, you know what that is. Well, my grandfather, Bert Snyder, who, when he joined the military, he signed his name Madeline, but when he got married, he signed his name Snyder. A year later. So he had this, my father said he had this thing about this fear of the government, you know. You didn't legally go in a courtroom and get your name changed, I guess, in those days. But our grandfather just chose to be his stepfather, to be Snyder, rather than Madeline. But remember, he was only 5 years old when Charles Snyder married his mother. So they go down to Curtis, Nebraska. At this time, my brother Kent said, oh, did he take you down there? Because he took Kent down there. Kent's 8 years younger than I am, right? Yes.
No, yeah, that's right,
Yes.
up 70.
Right, right. You can disclose ages of women positively, not negatively.
Oh,
And Jennifer is born the same year as Kent. So I am married a spring chicken.
Robin the Cradle.
You know what drew me to her? Online.
Careful.
Bet online.
Yeah. We might not.
I had looked at 90 pictures online of women over 50 years old. I was in grief. I mean, I was alone, I was wrung out, and so forth. And this was for entertainment. It's like comic strip. All these women on this webpage were advertising for a mate, or a partner, as they say today. I got tired of the fact, well, I'm going to go to bed. But there was the last one, Jennifer. You put a headline on these dating things, you know, supposed to wrap up your whole life view. Jesus is first in my life. That caught my attention. And that was one of those 3 o'clock in the morning thoughts I had after waking up in the middle of the night. I think I'm going to get in touch with this lady. If nothing else, we can talk about church or whatever. So that's how that came about. So when they went down to Curtis, now Curtis is where my grandma Cantrell was buried, and she is the mother of one of my grandmothers. And the strongest side of the family is the matrial side, because Cantrells, we have more Cantrells in the background than we do Snyders, obviously, because...
Are you going to tell them why?
No.
Because it's the cousin story.
So we're carrying on secrets.
I got into a theological discussion with our friends
Granddaddy
over in
and
America
grandma.
last night, so I won't go over there. But you can look in the book of Leviticus, I think it's...
Oh,
I think
good.
it's something like that. So, anyway, there's nothing wrong with that. Our father and mother were cousins.
First cousins.
First cousins.
Their grandmothers
Their grandmothers were sisters. And they were Cantrells, though, you see.
That's what everybody says when I tell them. That's why you're the It was a big secret in our family.
Right.
They were sitting right here, so that's
I think the family out, and honestly and truly, the family out there in Nebraska, where my father gravitated all the time, that's where he met our mother. As one of his cousins. He goes to Curtis in one of these letters, and he says, at Curtis, he says, Aunt so-and-so, Aunt so-and-so, Aunt so-and-so, and Uncle so-and-so, and so-and-so, and about 40 cousins were there, he says.
Cousin Ruby.
Which is a little bit, yeah, she's in there too. So, that pretty much wraps that up. But what I want to say is, I have his Bible. Obviously, this is a newer cook, which is needed because it was falling apart. And I do want to read to you, to show you that my father did grow up. You all know that. You saw him when he was Granddaddy. So in his Bible in the front, I'm looking, and you know how most Bibles, I don't think study Bibles have them, but it says family, and then it says marriages and deaths and so forth and so on. In his flyleaves, he writes the names of songs. Roll the Call Up Yonder, I didn't find it there, but he didn't have room. And some songs that he didn't know, he wrote the words to. Hymns, always hymns. Our grandmother, as my brother Kent was reminding me last night, she got in that state of mind after age 80, where she couldn't carry on a clear conversation, shall we say. You call out a hymn, and she starts singing it, and she sang every verse, every word correct. Out it came. I've heard my father tell that, and I remember sitting at the feet of my grandmother. I was small then, and experiencing that, kind of awestruck by it. So, there was one thing I wanted to read you. Here it is. Okay. All right. The only page he filled out was deaths. And he wrote the title of a song or some it says "How to Listen to God." It's in quotation marks. Maybe he's disclosing what was going on in his mind at the time of our mother's death. But beneath that he wrote "Ruby in Heaven, 1987, 4 p.m., October 19th. Then he has Matthew 11:28. Come unto me. And that's all I'm going to read. His favorite verse was, or his favorite chapter in the Bible was John 14. Where I am, you may be also. In my house are many mansions, and so forth and so on. I heard him read that more than one time. So that wraps that up. Do you have any questions?
Is this Neil Doman?
Yes, that's Neil.
Okay.
Yes, at age 19. Or no, he'd be age 20 in that picture. That picture was taken a year after he hitchhiked. But I think he's still in Nebraska when that was taken. Because in one letter, he says, "Send me my clothes. I'm getting tired of borrowing Uncle so-and-so's clothes to work in." And I wonder where he got a fancy suit like he's wearing there with a vest and everything. And so maybe that was among the things that she sent.
Uncle Steve, I might have missed it, but he said when he got there, his grandmother and his aunt didn't know him.
Didn't know him.
Was he coming with, they weren't expecting him at all?
Oh yeah, I think they were.
That's what I wanted.
Certainly notified him. It took him 4 days to get there, but they hadn't seen him for 6 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they knew he was coming.
How much do you change between age 12 and age 19? And so they're seeing him, and some of them didn't recognize him. And then after they did learn who he was, when they introduced him to strangers, they introduced him by another name so they could have a big laugh with this stranger and carry on for 2 or 3 days, not knowing who this man was. He signed the last letter. "Your little red-headed son, Neil."
How long did he stay out there?
Over a year.
Really?
Over a year.
How little was he?
He and my mother were
19.
married in 29.
He was about 20 when he
1930.
Little.
November 19th.
He wrote that to his mother, her little
I
red-headed
went and
son.
picked up the marriage license at the Rockville County Courthouse.
Authority. Good. 1930.
And they got married in Maryland because
Cousins coming back.
DC wouldn't marry them because they were cousins.
They were,
Why they divulged that, I don't know.
did you say second?
First person.
They would only marry second cousins?
No.
Mothers.
She said
they wouldn't
marry
Oh, I
DC
thought
would
she
let them
said
get the
Washington
license
DC
they
would only marry second cousins.
All right, to bring it right
They
on the
probably
table.
did, but
If
whatever.
they're married in 1930, that's the same year this man was born.
True story.
They got married right before he was born.
And your mother, Vanna, was born the year after 1931. So there you are. Thank you very much for this meal. I appreciate it. And
Most people change their names to hide criminal activities. Does that happen in your family?
I don't know.
We don't know. Secrets. There are lots of
This
secrets.
Eli Manlung, he's a mysterious guy.
There you go.
Well, if it is
I
way
had
better
a
than
missionary
marrying
in church. He said he was a tailor and he was a Jew. He says for
But we
sure.
don't know that because there's actually no information that I can find on that thing.
When Sarah went to Germany with her husband, several weeks
I thought she couldn't find it.
she went through the phone book and Madeline was there. She couldn't
She's
find
like,
it.
yeah.
How do you spell that Madeline?
M-A-D-L-U-N-G.
It's got a new law. It has a new law.
Where's the standing ovation? You ready? Alex, clap.
No applause, just send cake.